All right. Okay. Well, we're ready to go. So for the next hour, so Katrina, I'll hand over to you. So I'm Greg O'Connor. I chair the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, and the minister's asked me to stand in for him and chair this meeting. So, Katrina, have you got most of whom you are expecting on the call?
I've got about half at the moment, Greg. I've been told that the House is still filing out, which is where we've got people filing in. I'm not sure. Others would probably know
at this time of day, it is a ongoing process. There is a filing in and filing out going on. So it's it's like one of those little bloody little balls that never stops. So just depending, and also some members get called in at short notice as well. So we're best to get started, and
I appreciate that. Absolutely fine. Well, let's crack on then. I'm going to keep pressing the admit button. So we are a community-led initiative where we're calling ourselves Making Rail Work. And I think it's important to note that what we want to do is we want to make rail work for society as a whole. And that's not just to make it work as a standalone business. That's to understand how rail can support other policy areas as well. And we've really taken up this challenge because we see that government organisations don't necessarily have the capacity to address these problems at the moment. So we see a gap, and the specific gap that we see is in terms of passenger rail between Hamilton and Tauranga. We see that as part of a wider strategy, because in order to justify the line from Hamilton to Tauranga, you have to really understand what the strategy is for the Golden Triangle and economic growth in the Golden Triangle, and how that fits in with New Zealand's wider economic strategy as well, and also how it fits in with climate change and how it fits in with population changes, growths, movements, etc. as well. So this isn't your usual community group. We don't have petitions or placards. We don't buy tents and camp outside your office. Instead, what we do is we put our brains together, we put our skills together, and we come up with ideas and potential solutions that we want to work with you to try and enact and to try and bring into being. So very collaborative, and hopefully and incredibly non-partisan. We do not take a party political view. So one of the key things that we'll be talking about today is how do we emulate that in the work that we do, and how do we have support from parliamentarians as a group for the work that we're doing, so that we can get more of the community on board and more of the community involved in the work that we're doing in a positive and constructive way. Now, what I'm going to do first and foremost is the Making Rail Work report, which hopefully you will all have seen, like something like this, was the result of an evidence review. So we reviewed all of the evidence that we could get our hands on. We identified the key barriers and blockages to a rail line between Hamilton and Tauranga. And we tried to break them down and say, how would we solve these problems? And when we were looking for ideas and solutions, we did that by looking globally at what work was being done in other parts of the world. One of the key things that has come out of that is the idea of using a cooperative framework, or a mutual framework, a cooperative model, as a way of managing this piece of work in a public-private partnership style way, semi-outside government, whilst we're building that, and whilst other priorities in rail are being addressed. But we have Ros Henry on this call, fantastically. She's been supporting us in our endeavours since I started working on this project in the community. But before we talk about the cooperative models, and before we talk about some of those challenges that we have at a political level, I want to hand over to James Llewellyn to talk about some of the work that we've done with local councils and with public administration like Waka Kotahi and Kiwi Rail. James, can I hand over to you?
Kia ora. Thank you, Katrina. Good morning or good evening, everyone. It's morning here in the UK where I'm currently based. And really the key point I want to make this morning is that in the UK, I would say over the last 15 or 20 years, there is generally a consensus across the political divide that investment in rail, both for transport and indeed wider economic regeneration, sustainability, community access purposes is generally seen as a good thing. So although the political parties may disagree as to the models to use and the investment priorities, rail is actually seen as being something that everyone can sign up to. And I think one of the key objectives that we have is to try and get that political consensus for interregional rail in particular in New Zealand. So this is part of a very long-term process to build that consensus. The immediate priority, though, as Katrina says, is to work in particular with the respective regional councils at either end of the proposed passenger rail service, that is Waikato Regional Council in Hamilton and Bay of Plenty Regional Council in Tauranga, to get through their regional public transport plans an agreement in principle to support investigation into the interregional passenger rail service, and in particular to look at the cooperative model as a means of achieving that. Because at the moment in the UK, whilst a lot of really, really good stuff is going on in the rail industry, we do have something of a challenge with industrial relations in particular, and disagreements between various parts of the rail industry about how things move forward. And in my perception, the voice of the community and the customer in this process is perhaps not being given due weight. So the importance of a cooperative model is we want to see more community involvement in planning rail for the future, not just being left to people in the rail industry, talented though they are. So
James,
our approach at the moment is
James,
to...
Can I just ask you, where do you, what's your role in this? What do you do?
So I'm an independent consultant. I work for my own company. Recently, I was manager for transport and urban planning in Bay of Plenty, but that's not my role anymore. So I'm simply providing advice to making rail work to hopefully move things forward, in particular in the public administration space. So that's working with the regional councils, influencing their regional public transport plans and ultimately their regional land transport plans to get that agreement in principle to investigate into regional passenger rail.
And are you currently consulting to the regional councils in the area?
No.
All right. Okay, thanks. So I just trying to work out, I thought you might be coming in from the UK, you're actually coming in from...
I'm sorry, yes, James's accent and his current location probably creates a mild bit of confusion. James has lived and worked in Aotearoa for much longer than I have. And
I'll probably just pay Katrina, just when people are coming on, just a brief introduction as to who they are and what the role is, just to help those on the call.
Absolutely fine. Yes, James has also worked for Waka Kotahi, and when he was in the UK, worked for the Department for Transport there as well. So his expertise and understanding both what's happened in the UK, what's going on in the UK, and what's going on here in New Zealand, specifically in the Bay of Plenty, in terms of rail and passenger rail is very good. And he's led the work that we've been doing on responding to the regional transport plans, of which we've responded to both Waikato and to Bay of Plenty. Which we've been invited to, in terms of both, we've been invited to give further evidence. So that's where we're standing at the moment, and that's the work that James is doing. One of the key things that has come out of that piece of work is the disconnect between the two transport plans. There is a discussion that there is a requirement for a rail line to Tauranga in the Waikato plan, and there is no mention of it in the Bay of Plenty plan. But there is a wish to discuss a line, and one of the things that we'll talk about today is how do we expedite those discussions so that we can start making sure that those two conversations are joined up. And one of the key things that we feel is that we don't want to let the way in which the structures are working, seem to be working at the moment, and forgive my naivety if it's not the case, is it seems to be that the regional strategies are done in isolation and with a hope that the jigsaw piece puzzles fit together in terms of interregional connectivity. We want to start the process of having the conversation about how do they connect sooner rather than later. So that's the work that James is leading on for us. And what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to hand over to Michael van Drockenbroek, who leads on our rail industry engagement, works with Kiwi Rail, works with a number of different rail projects here in New Zealand at the moment, has also worked in Australia and has worked in the Middle East with using rail in terms of interregional transport, and wants to bring a lot of that knowledge and learning back to New Zealand, which is where a lot of our thinking is coming from in terms of what this is doing. But Michael, I'll hand over to you for just now.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Yes, in particular, looking at the East Coast main trunk between Hamilton and Tauranga, it's a key infrastructure asset in New Zealand. It's currently heavily used by freight. It's a key part of our port strategy between Tauranga and Auckland, and has a lot of freight trains traversing it every single day. What we're looking at is improving the capacity of the line over time to have a passenger rail service. So when any upgrades are done to the corridor, that the passenger capability is restored and enhanced, in particular looking at extra track capacity on the line. Also looking at, for example, the Kaimai Tunnel and the constraints on that. We also take a more holistic view. My background as Executive Director of Public Transport Planning for the state of Victoria in Australia for a few years in the late 2017 to about 2019, taught me the importance of having integrated transport networks and the resilience of those networks, and rail was a key part of that. And the challenge that we had in Victoria is very similar to the challenge that we have in parts of New Zealand. In particular on the Golden Triangle, which is where we're focusing here, roughly 50% of New Zealand's population lives in a corridor north of Te Awamutu, if you cut across the country, across the North Island. So New Zealand's actually quite an urbanised country, and it is actually quite well suited in many ways to rail in the more densely populated areas. Yes, it's sparsely populated in the South Island and Central North Island, but the corridors we're looking at here for the establishment of a passenger rail service are actually quite densely populated. And also, it's important to note that around about 35% of New Zealanders prefer not to drive or can't drive for various reasons. So there's a lot of people, and this is the same experience that we've had in Australia and in the Middle East, which was a very car-centric culture. And I headed up railway planning in Abu Dhabi for Etihad Rail, building a new greenfield railway. It was about getting people the choice and the options of greater mobility, and equalising transport options for society as a whole. New Zealand's got an ageing population, so there's going to be more people over time that want to access public transport services. And rail is ideally situated to do that, and particularly on the Golden Triangle, looking at investment interventions, like, for example, double tracking, to be able to expand the capacity of that network, both for freight concurrently and for passenger rail. So as a more holistic view, New Zealand as a whole's interregional public transport strategy also needs further development and some policy direction. We're very good at our regional public transport policies, and some of the work that I've been doing with Te Huia, for example, on the Waikato region, is looking at enhancing the capacity of that network over time, and what the interventions required, for example, in the Auckland rail network, because it's heavily congested, which is not dissimilar to congestion you see on motorways, etc. So what I bring to the table is expertise and having over 20 years experience in working in New Zealand railways industry, but predominantly for Kiwi Rail and Toll New Zealand and its predecessors, but also that 10 years of international flavour, having led public transport planning for some of the most diverse parts of the world you can imagine, ranging from Abu Dhabi in the Middle East to Australia and Victoria in particular, and heavily urbanized areas, but also areas where regional connectivity is important, and bringing back the rail to the people and understanding that it's part of connected, joined up networks, not just part of rail, but looking at the whole holistic thing about joined up journeys, what people colloquially call the last mile. Often rail is criticised as not being able to provide door-to-door solutions. The people that I work with internationally include people like Deutsche Bahn from Germany, and they look at rail passenger as a holistic sense. It's not just a station-to-station journey, it's about the whole connected journey, using things like rideshare apps, etc., personal mobility, walking and cycling, scootering to stations, cycling to stations, park and ride. So that whole joined up nature, increasing the spatial planning around the rail corridors, some intensification along the corridors, making sure that you actually design a transport system in line with the way that you're designing your economy to some degree, or letting your economy flourish. So rail is a great segue to promote development, and the best example in New Zealand in recent years of that is what's actually happened in Auckland. For example, when Britomart opened in 2003, that whole downtown area of Auckland flourished dramatically, and so Tauranga has a lot of capacity.
Sorry, Michael, just conscious of time and conscious of the fact that that we need to, there's a few other people that we need to hear from. We'll come back to you on a few of those points towards the end of the call. Yes. I think the importance of what we're trying to say is that we've been looking at this work with the right type of expertise in the room and the right type of global experience as well. So yes, just to reiterate that point. I want to quickly pass to Susan Trodden to talk less about the global work that we've been looking at and more about how we've been engaging with the community. And Susan, conscious of time as well, if you can summarise that rather promptly, that would be amazing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not an expert in trains, policy, politics, or global research, but what I am good at is telling a story and getting people on board with it. So I was at the front of TRON, which was the advocacy group for Te Huia, and learned a lot along that journey of 10 years of what worked and what didn't in terms of engaging the public in a story about why rail was relevant and important. So my job in this is to take all of that expertise and turn it into bite-sized pieces that the general public is going to go, yep, I want to be part of that. And a politician is going to say, tell me more. So that is my role in 1 minute. Thanks.
Thank you. And the interest that we've had, we're building on a lot of the work that was done by Susan. So we've already got thousands of followers on Facebook and LinkedIn, and we have got a lot of community interest, and we're building. So if we can get a political consensus that this work is something that we want to see continue, then we literally have hundreds of people who want to help us out and be involved. And one of the things that we also talked about, which hasn't been brought up yet, that Jackie, you and I talked about yesterday, is our want to make sure that this is very much built on the needs and the wants and the aspirations of Tangata Whenua, and how we can make sure that this works for the people of our lands. So
Katrina, it might be just useful with Susan. There's been a lot of political opposition to that rail line. How has that manifested itself in Hamilton, and how did you overcome that?
The opposition, the way we overcame it was, being cleverly political in terms of getting empathetic voice in media. So we found friends within the media at TVNZ, TV3, Radio New Zealand, what have you, that were able to tell a better story. And we also went right back to the facts and the realities of the first iteration of the train, and then Te Huia. Absolutely, there are things that could be better, but telling a strategic story about what it's going to look like, connected thinking, social equity, climate change. We started Te Huia before Uber had been invented. Facebook was brand new, and there was no ultra fast broadband and no pandemic. And so that was our journey. So we've learned from all of that, and there was no one on the team that really knew very much about trains. So what we were able to do was build a story around building an expertise, but adding in that element that was about, this is about what me, the consumer, wanting to catch a train to Auckland, what does that look like for you, the consumer? And that was the angle. And that journey, journey is not finished because there's still more work there. But all right from the start, the discussion was, how do we make it a triangular experience? Because you can't just say Hamilton to Auckland, thanks very much, that's commuter rail sorted for New Zealand. It was always about the triangle, Tauranga, the small towns where people live that don't have access, don't have social equity. And that story was what got us the momentum, and that tumbleweed grew over that 10 years. And now we are in essentially stage 2.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Katrina, back to you.
Thank you very much. I was going to hand back to you, or I can introduce Paul Clark. Paul Clark's coming to us from the UK. He is not in New Zealand. He is a former transport minister in the UK. He also worked with John Prescott on the Sustainable Communities Plan and ran the Thames Gateway All-Party Parliamentary Group whilst I was working in Whitehall there. So yes, I want to pass over to Paul for his thoughts in terms of what lessons could we learn from the UK. And Paul is also a part of this team because he helps challenge us, because he currently advises quite a number of other countries on transport policy as well, and he's kindly donating his expertise. Clearly he owes me some favours that I don't know about, but he's donating his expertise at the moment to our cause. So Paul, can I hand over to you?
Kia ora, Paul.
Good afternoon to you in New Zealand. Sorry, and Greg, I was looking at you and thinking, I can see Louise Ellman, who used to be chair of the Select Committee, Transport Select Committee in the UK, and as a poor humble minister, I had to appear before and be questioned and interrogated by your equivalent here in the UK. So let me say I'm sitting here in trepidation.
You look like you survived the experience well.
I thank you kindly, you're too kind. Appreciate obviously being able to join you this today. I think some of the things that you've heard throughout the contributions from my colleagues here, one of the things that has come out is about integration. It's about more than just the train on the line and moving, in this case, people from A to B. It's about being able to join together all the competing demands that there are upon government and issues to be dealt with. And so Susan has just said, in terms of the work that she'd done in the human story, in painting and bringing together all the aspects that are involved. And whether it's climate change, population growth, movement, bringing people into society, giving them greater access and mobility, then are fundamentally important. Michael talked about the business to do with aging population. All those things are part and parcel of what has to be grappled with by government and at all levels and society generally. So I think the work that we did on High Speed 1, our first high-speed rail link, the work that we did on the largest regeneration, and when I say regeneration, I'm talking, this isn't about gentrification and so on, which I think is the way that regeneration terminology is used in New Zealand. This is about making sure that we actually have a program that brings together not just housing and people, but all the things that go with that, whether that be jobs growth, whether that be leisure growth, whether that be housing, homes, all that needs to be welded together. And the one thing that can be the link there are clearly the transport corridors. And rail can play that fantastic part in bringing that together. And we did that within the largest regeneration area in Europe at that time, called the Thames Gateway. And that had so many aspects and so many moving parts to it. The need for coordination, the need for people to understand what was going on needed to happen. Did we get it right all the time? No. There were lessons that were learnt, balls that dropped from the air that we didn't handle, but you learn from that, and it got better. I will just say that I am one of the other things. I'm working with a country in West Africa who are looking at creating a railway, literally, basically a cross-rail operation. And with that, we are looking at the transport nodes that will be there for growth, for housing, for business development, economic structure. So using clearly the transport system, and rail in this case, as that growth factor, as the way of planning and helping to take forward the desires and so on of all of the government are critical in doing that. The last thing I will say, and this will be the last thing, a typical politician, always one more thing. Can I say, this literally crosses boundaries, and railways and transport corridors don't stop at any arbitrary boundaries that we've ended up drawing for administrative purposes. They don't stop. They don't stop with the political boundaries. It has to cross those, and that's what's important in being able to have a meeting like this. And I hope that maybe to form some kind of group, an APPG, that would cut across those so that the issues can be looked at. I will shut up now, Katrina, because I know that we're going to hear from literally a voice of the future of, maybe, certainly a future taxpayer, homeowner, and that's going to be, I was going to say, and a future mother maybe, but what I am going to say is someone who very much that we need to understand and listen to the voice of our young Mary, who's going to be with us.
Well, just before you do that, can I just ask, in the UK in your time and since, have they built any new corridors, or are you talking about work going on existing rail corridors?
Well, there's existing rail corridors, and as James said, I mean, thank goodness there is common sense across all the main political divides in terms of investment in rail. We had a period when investment in rail did not happen, and it led to disaster, including appalling deaths that happened on the railways. That was back in the 80s and 90s. In terms of new corridors, of course, High Speed 2, which we proposed at the tail end of our tenure in office. When I say ours, I should say that I was a Labour politician and in the Blair Brown governments. So we launched High Speed 2, connecting London with then the northern parts on a high-speed route. That's still going ahead, a long process, so that's happening. And of course, around that is planning that is going on to actually talk about where will be, or where are the growth areas going to be? How is this going to be? How are you going to take advantage of that connectivity that you get with rail? How can you take advantage of that in a measured and planned way, so that you don't end up with sprawling development all the way up the line that then messes up environmentally and the beautiful country that you have, and indeed we have in the UK. So that growth is still happening, and indeed there are plans for the northern area or high-speed connectivity across the country.
Sorry, the question was, that high-speed connectivity, is that new corridor, or is that on existing corridor?
Yes, Greg.
Yeah, it's a new corridor. Yeah.
Right, okay, that was what I wanted to hear.
It's new corridors, and they're new corridors. Sorry, I helped establish HS2 in the UK. They are new corridors. They're new corridors and new tunnels to Birmingham initially from London. with an offshoot to Heathrow, and then connecting the northern cities. There are some elements, because of areas of outstanding natural beauty, that some of them aren't as direct as you would want them to be, but you don't want to upset the environmental standards. But those new corridors have been looked at, and there is a lot of very, very interesting evidence about how they're being soundproofed and how they're being proofed to ensure that the surrounding natural environments aren't affected by those corridors, which is very interesting and something that we can bring to the table in due course if we get to that stage of the conversation. I think that I think that is a perfect introduction really for Mary, because I think that one of the things that rail really does is it gives us certainty. When you put down tracks and say this is where a city centre is going, this is where a centre is going to be, or this is where a township is going to be, there's a commitment to that. So even if we don't have a train on a track for 16 years, if we can build those station hubs, then we can build the communities around it in advance so that we celebrate the arrival of those trains. And I'm going to hand over to Mary just now, because Mary joined us and she'll tell you how she came to us. But as someone who will be voting for the first time in the next election and has volunteered to manage our stakeholder engagement process and also our youth outreach programme, I thought it would be important for you to hear from her as well. Mary, we'll jump to you, and then I want to open to the floor for a wider discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Hi, I'm Mary. I met Katrina when I was doing the AUT Shadow Leader program, where I met Roz at NZ Co-op. Hello. And from there, I learned about how the cooperative could link to New Zealand Rail and it being New Zealand's first rail cooperative. I was very interested in the fact that it could grow the economy and help improve that. As a teenager, considering the current economic climate, I'd say we're constantly being told that the future isn't promising, and that's not really assuring, considering that, as you've mentioned before, we are your future parents, future taxpayers, future voters, and in the sense that kind of disincentivizes us from wanting to contribute to our own future, especially knowing that there are older generations, not everyone, but we're constantly being told that it's very unlikely to happen. And so I wanted to be part of this project because I wanted to see how the disconnect between older and younger generations could be solved. And looking at the team, it was very encouraging to know that there is hope, that this economy can be grown, and that as a younger person, it's not just a single effort, that it's a joint effort. And so, yes. I'm also part of the stakeholder management aspect of it, so I will be contacting you in the future about any updates in terms of the project. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you, Mary. Very good.
I'll pass back to you now, Greg. I'm all done, and hopefully we can start hearing from some considerations from MPs. But I'll pass back to you, Greg, and I'll stop talking.
All right, thanks, Katrina. Well, look, we've got some people who haven't spoken. Is there any sort of questions, or anyone else thinks they would like to add to this discussion, some points that haven't been made, or questioning any of our speakers that have made some points? Feel free to join in the discussion. Jamie.
Yeah,
just
thanks, Greg.
Yourself, Jamie, you'd like to.
Yeah, great. So my name's Jamie Strange. I'm the MP for Hamilton East, Labour MP. So I guess I've sort of been involved in the discussion for quite a long time in terms of Hamilton to Auckland. And if I remember correctly, back in 2017, when there was a Labour Party policy, in terms of Hamilton to Auckland. There were certainly discussions at that time around Hamilton across to Tauranga. So the discussions have been going on for quite a long time. Yeah, and unfortunately haven't really managed to move forward too much. I think it's great the work you're doing in terms of the two regional councils, in terms of getting it on their long-term plans, and you'll probably, their transport plans. And you'll probably need to lobby the territorial councils because, as I understand it, they all have a vote on those plans. So there's a little bit of work to do there in terms of getting the priority up high on those regional transport plans. Yeah, and also, acknowledge the fact that you're reaching out cross-party, which is absolutely fantastic. And I see we've got MPs from quite a few parties here. Yeah, I am interested. We're probably not at that stage yet, but I am interested in some of the limitations in terms of the double tracking, whether it needs to be double tracked, whether the Kaimais is classed as a mine at the moment. So obviously you can't go through with the diesel, whether it needs to be a hydrogen electric train, or whether your advice is that we leave those conversations for further down the track. And then final other point / question is, I know the Ministry, if I remember correctly, there was an announcement from Minister Twyford that about 3 years ago that, and Julianne, you might have been involved in this as well, but that the Ministry of Transport are doing a detailed business case for rapid rail between Hamilton and Auckland, and an indicative business case or basic business case passenger rail between Hamilton and Tauranga, and that they were doing those two pieces of work at the same time. I see nods from Julianne. My understanding that work is pretty close to being released. So yeah, I know there's a couple of questions in there, but yeah, leave that with you, Katrina, or others.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. Yes, in terms of your questions, you're absolutely right. And one of the questions on this call, and Andrew, possibly this is something that comes to you, given the conversations that I've had with Simon Uppendale and Todd Muller, as well at Jantonetti, we've got you on the call, and Kerry, we've got you representing Angie Warren Clark. How do we? What can we do as parliamentarians? What can we do to encourage those regional councils to start joining up those conversations and to start having those discussions about what that line looks like, so that we don't find ourselves in a position where we just hope that the jigsaw pieces fit together. And I come to any of you who have got comments, Jan, Andrew, Kerry. Any thoughts would be awesome. Simeon, I know you've probably had conversations with Todd and Sam as well. So have we got any thoughts? Andrew, you've taken yourself off mute, so I'll stop talking.
Yeah, look, regional councils through their regional transport and public transport have looked at, I'm talking about the Bay of Plenty Regional Council here, I'm a member of that. I actually chair public transport. But we've looked at and are open to looking at, again, in the future, opening up rail to public transport. And there's some more potential opportunities even going further east from Tauranga, because we see growth is moving into that area, and we're doing a feasibility of a satellite city, for instance, to the east. So this has been on the cards. There's been quite a lot of work done over the years. It's not new. Cost has always been the overriding factor, and then with Tauranga, because of the port traffic, and I think there's something like 93 trains a week, expected to get to 140 trains a week within the next 12 months. So that's a that line is pretty heavily utilised. So there would appear to need to be some substantial double tracking, which so there are issues there. I remember we used to have a train line to Auckland, and 20 years ago, and I used it a few times myself. At that stage, I had a yacht, and we, with partners, and we used the train to go between as we took over, utilising the yacht. So it's not.
We're not all that fortunate.
It's not that we haven't had it in the past, but it's getting the priorities right, making sure that we've got the funding in place, because it is a big, especially with upgrading the Kaimai Tunnel, which is another possibility that might need to be done. It's a big project, but it's something that is and should stay on the radar.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. And
I think Julianne Ginger's been looking for the call for
yeah.
So do you want to bring Julianne on?
Kia ora koutou. Apologies. I have a sick baby who had to be picked up from daycare early, and so the whole family is now in my office, so I can attend this meeting. So I did want to quickly say, I think it's really encouraging that you're doing this work. The Green Party ran on a staged proposal for regional rail before the 2017 election, which included building a passenger, creating a passenger service on our existing line between Auckland, Hamilton, and Tauranga, and had some pretty specific proposals around that. And what has happened is I was an associate minister from 2017 to of transport from 2017 to 2020, and now because there's a Labour majority, I'm just the mere deputy chair of the transport committee with to step in for Greg if ever I need to. But I just wanted to say that the biggest barrier, I think, is there was political will on the part of the Greens, certainly, and New Zealand First and Labour in the last coalition government. But there seems to be a lack of an institution that's capable of carrying out the work. So the politicians get elected and they say, look, we want this to happen, but there's no one who can make it happen. And the Tahuya service is far from ideal as an initial trial, and it costs quite a bit more money than I would have hoped, really. And to get to the point of where Jamie Strange mentioned there should be, and there is apparently a business case being developed for longer term high-speed rail, because in the Greens proposal, we had a long-term, developing over 20 to 30 years, a much higher speed rail connection, not high speed like they mean in France, but 160 kilometers, 180 kilometers an hour using tilt trains on our standard narrow gauge, but definitely some double tracking and tunneling would be needed for that. So anyway, I want to congratulate you for the work you've done. I think it's good. But I think the biggest barrier right now is, well, there's two. One is that it'd be interesting to hear what Simeon Brown says about this. The National Party doesn't seem to support developments in rail and seems to attack anything the government tries to do on it. And that's certainly a barrier to building long-term cross-party consensus. And secondly, there's a lack of institutional capability. So there's not the right institution to do this work on both joining up the land use planning and to, even proposing and developing a service or building a long-term case for investment. So, when the government had a COVID response and there was tons of money going into shovel-ready quote unquote projects, the Transport Agency had a bunch of highways projects which don't stack up, which have very low benefit cost ratios, so don't make any sense on a climate perspective or a traffic perspective. And yet they can get billions of dollars for those projects politically because people have been building up the plans around them and building up the political support for a decade or 2 decades. And we just haven't had that with rail. So I think hopefully the work that you're doing can start to build that, but we still need some place in government that has the expertise that politicians can actually say, look, we've got you the money, now where's the plan? So, right now that has happened in the Lower North Island. There is a proposal between Greater Wellington and Horizons Regional Council, and they've got funding from Waka Kotahi, our transport agency, to invest in trains and track work that will enable an increased frequency of services between Palmerston North, Wellington, and the Wairarapa. So that's kind of two lines in the region. It is many years away and it still hasn't got funding. They only need 350 million of Crown funding. But basically, I don't know what it's going to take for there to be a similar case made for the next steps from Tauranga through to Hamilton and Auckland. And it needs to be done at a reasonably frequent level so that it doesn't look like a failure immediately. And I think that was a risk with Te Huia, is if it's insufficient frequency or insufficiently connected when it gets into Auckland, not able to go all the way into Britomart, that it won't ever build, it won't see the potential of a more ambitious trial.
Absolutely. Sorry to just jump in on that one, but but just in response to that, I appreciate where you're coming from, and hopefully Simeon will be able to respond on behalf of National in that regard. The thing for me though is that I genuinely do think that the benefits of connecting Tauranga and Hamilton are good enough in their own rights in terms of uniting those economies, and I do genuinely believe that we can get on with that, and do that whilst the difficulties in Auckland are being worked out. And I think that one of the reasons that we've decided to work through this as a cooperative model and not petitioning and all of those things, and to suggest a cooperative model, is because we want to build an appetite for the line before it arrives, so that it's welcomed to communities by the time it opens its doors, and it's not suddenly talked about 5 minutes before it happens. So yeah, Greg, I'm going to pass back to you. I'm not sure if Simeon is going to join the conversation, but I know that
I'm happy to join Katrina.
Thank you.
Welcome,
I've
Simeon.
just been listening quietly, and for some reason my camera's not playing up, but just wanted to thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here today, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I think the approach that you're taking is really really good, engaging with across the parties and trying to have a conversation about this. I think there's certainly some really good conversations to be had around commuter rail, and I think it's unfair some of the comments Julianne did make around the critique of National's perspective on the issue. We do have a track record of investing significantly in commuter rail, in particular. If you look at the City Rail link up in Auckland, I mean, it's a massive investment which is going to transform commuter rail in Auckland substantially. So I think to say that there's a lack of political will, I think is unfair. However, there is a need to ensure that there is good evidence, good business case approach taken to the development of plans, and I think Julianne even acknowledged herself that the Te Huia train link was too expensive, and I think that taxpayers have expectations around how these projects are funded. And so look, I think it's important we continue the conversation. We're very interested, very keen to be part of that, but also we want to make sure we're getting good value for money, and I think that's certainly a perspective which I think needs to be included in the conversation that we are having.
All right, look, thank you, Simeon, and I think that sort of sums up probably some of the issues we've come to. But we've got about 8 minutes left.
I think Simon Court's keen to have a say as well.
Simon, and look, you've got your hand up there, Simon, hidden away on the top of my screen. So yes, looking forward to hearing from you. Bearing in mind we have only got 8 minutes left on the call, and we would just like to have some sort of 2 or 3 minutes at the end, just a where to from here. So
thank you, Greg, and look, thank you, Katrina. I've read your report. It's interesting. It's stimulating discussion here in our policy team. I guess a few observations. I have a background as a civil and environmental engineer, and I've worked on a number of transportation projects, including on the rail, on bridges and various things. What strikes me is how far our ambition is from what we are currently able to resource and deliver. Julianne mentioned that, she's right on there. Our capability is barely able to meet demand to increase track capacity in Auckland, deliver City Rail link, and that's before we get on to thinking about how would we renew and refresh assets like the Wellington railway network with signals are 40 years old, and we can't actually even use all the tracks we've got efficiently. So the problem that I see in terms of what projects get priority and what gets funded and who pays is that we just don't seem to have enough people in New Zealand outside of the major metros to justify investing in passenger rail between destinations like Hamilton, Auckland and Tauranga. It's almost like we haven't quite cracked that next million or 2 or 5 million that would make the revenue stream available. So I think there's a timing issue there. How big or how great does New Zealand need to get before we start investing in really high quality intercity passenger rail? I'm not sure we're there yet or will be in the next decade or two. And the other thing is, think about this massive outstanding commitment just to maximising the benefits of the Auckland rail network as an example. I'm in Auckland, so you'll hear a bit about that. There's an estimate out there that around $7 billion is needed just to complete the grade separation on the Auckland rail network to get those kind of 35 to 50,000 passengers per hour going through the CBD part, through the City Rail Link part. Now, what's the point in spending $5, $6, $7 billion on the City Rail Link, a 3-kilometre tunnel, if you're not going to spend the rest of the money on the network to get the wider benefits? None of those things are really appear to be a priority for the current government, and yet they're already talking about investing, say, somewhere between 20 and 30 billion on a separate piece of kit, the Auckland Light Rail, and that's just one leg.
Simon, I think given the time limit we have, it's probably you're getting into a fairly political statement, and we're just what you are making it clear is that you're not in favour of any expansion into Tauranga. Would that be right? Without and I just can't help but wondering whether Sir Julius Vogel might have how much we would have ended up with in the 1890s if we'd perhaps
Greg,
because it's not a select committee, it's an opportunity for us to have, we're trying to have an open dialogue here, and I think
we are, but we're also now running near the end of time, Simeon. So what I'd like to do now, perhaps is as we get into that last 5 minutes of the call, just to have, is there a way forward from here? From our, and Simeon, you're on our Transport Select Committee, I think there's perhaps a broader opportunity to put some context around this, perhaps into a broader discussion on passenger transport, rail transport in the country, and to put some context around this, because that might just, because there's some good ideas that come out of here, and Simon Court made some good points, is that, and as you deduce, Simeon, is that we end up looking at these things in the standalone, whereas probably they all belong in a broader issue, as the triangle. We talked about the Auckland Triangle, or the Upper North Island Triangle. So is that something that perhaps those on the call, and Paul, from your background in the UK, ensuring that whatever we do here, we don't perhaps just look at this in its isolation, but in passenger transport or rail transport throughout the whole country, rail passenger transport. Is that something that, any commentary on that?
Yeah, no, thank you, Greg. And it's been a fascinating discussion and contributions that have gone on. Let me just say, everyone, I'm sure any political party wants value for money for taxpayers. It's a necessity for us to do. But it does have to, you have to look at it in the round. My view is that it's not just about what is the cost of building the railway, it's what's the costs of not addressing some of the problems and other issues that you may well be thinking of. And I'm not getting into any political debate here and so on. I'm just wanting to say, I know that there is a discussion, I'll put it no strong on that, about population growth. Where is that growth going to be? How is that going to be handled? How is indeed the economic base going to grow to be able to fund, whether it be transport, whether it be health, whether it be housing? Governments need money to be able to do it. I think the other thing to say is there's no quick fix to this. Let me tell you, with High Speed 2, which is the new corridor that we were talking about, I helped to launch that in 2009, but it'd been going on for some years before that in discussions. And let me tell you, no train has run on that line yet. And we are now, what, 13 years on from when we launched it. Has there been political differences with the changes of government? Yes, there have. Have things been tweaked and so on? Yes, they have. But there's still the high-speed rail link that was envisaged because there's been a cross-party consensus, but there have been differences. So what I'm just about to say is clearly going to still allow for political differences, but in a transparent way and so on. I mean, my view is this isn't a quick fix. It does need people to be open, honest, for transparency to be there, but it does need to include not just us great politicians, I'll say that with tongue in cheek, but it needs to actually have the communities on board. That story, that understanding, painting the picture that Susan talked about earlier on needs to happen, and it needs to happen at all levels. People need to go, excuse the pun, but people need to be taken on that journey, because people will all have preconceived ideas and so on. And I think, you know, one of the ways that that can happen is, and I used to take great note of the all-party parliamentary groups that we had, and we had many all-party parliamentary groups just in transport, let alone every other subject under the sun. But I always listened to those, as well as clearly the select committee work that was done. Always listen to those, and maybe there is a possibility that you would consider looking to set up such a body that would also involve, you know, community people and also business interests and so on, to start that discussion. There has to be a joined up thinking going on, but in a transparent way. So an APPG may be a way forward as part and parcel of this work that needs to be undertaken and looked at, allowing for differences of opinion that will undoubtedly be there, Greg.
All right, well, look, and on those on the Transport Select Committee here, we'll see on the agenda tomorrow, there is a discussion on doing an inquiry into this broader issue. So you may like to have some thoughts about that. Katrina,
Greg.
I'll get you to finish off since it's your initiative.
Sorry, Greg. This is Kerry from Andrew Moran Clark's office. As I'm sure you're aware, Angie as well as Mr. Court are both on Environment Select Committee, and I think they may also have some views as well. And so I was just wondering whether Transport would consider talking to Environment Select Committee about this as well.
Sounds like a good idea. Is Angie back in the country yet?
She's just landed.
All right, good.
Thank you,
Greg.
Greg.
Katrina, I'll hand over to you. Thanks for that.
Greg,
Jerry.
thank you.
Katrina.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining the call. It is my hope, and I will speak to the Office of the Clerk about the parameters that are required to create an all-party parliamentary group. Just as by way of note, the number of ideas, the number of suggestions, the number of conversations that we spurn in the community, whenever Susan and I can tell you, and Michael as well, if we have to present to 5 different parties, then it takes us 5 times the amount of time, and we don't have budgets. So if we had an all-party parliamentary group, we would have to do it once, and we're suggesting that we do that once a quarter. We're either by
Katrina, I'm sorry, I have to go. I've got to speak in the House, so we'll have to call this to. But you'll have that opportunity if we tomorrow, as a committee, decide to have this committee into, or this inquiry into parliamentary. That will provide the opportunity you're talking about,
and we will help facilitate it. That's the extension of our team. Is that we will help facilitate it, and we will help structure it, and with Paul Clark's support as well, we'll make sure that we provide global evidence as well. Thank you,
Katrina. Thank you everyone for your attendance, and with the parliamentary calendar, I'm afraid that some other things have to take priority. So thank you for your attendance, and maybe we'll see you at any inquiry that may transpire after tomorrow. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else who needs to jump off can jump off. Anyone else who wants to stay on can stay on. Yes, we're losing most. So has anyone else got anything to add, or does anyone else have any thoughts about an all-party group? Yes, open to further comments.
Sorry, I have to run because I have to take the kids home, but I think that this inquiry at the Transport Select Committee on the future of passenger rail would be a really great place to start. And the only party not represented in that is Te Pāti Māori, and they only have 2 members, and I think they're very broadly supportive of rail. So I think you can count them as being on side without having to get them on side.
We have Jackie Rollinston-Steed, and we have Ezra, or we did have Ezra on the call, who work with Jackie. You could explain the work that you do on behalf of iwi, and Jackie's been listening into this call on behalf of Tangata Whenua, to make sure that we can keep those Te Pāti Māori well informed. So we have had that on the call today as well, to ensure that it definitely is all party engaging. Jackie, if you've got anything to add to that, then please jump in.
Yeah, I'm mindful that Julie has to leave and appreciate that. So it's probably a conversation that we could delve in a little bit more later. But again, I think this whole project is ensuring that there is the appropriate amount of engagement with tangata whenua. And just pretty much joining out the dots, my role is I'm local government from the Regional Council for the past 20 years, regional economic development, and have now recently moved into the Regional Public Service Commission with Ezra Schuster as our Waiariki commissioner. So he's just jumped off, but essentially our role is to ensure there's some cohesion at an all of government arrangement when it comes to these projects, but also ensuring that those dots are met with tangata whenua with some of these bigger projects.
Thank you, Jackie. So I hope that gives you some reassurance, Julie.
Yeah, definitely. I've found the cross-party groups, it's hard to get MPs to engage in them, and maybe it's because we have a much smaller parliament than they have in the UK. So I think the select committee doing an inquiry will be a great opportunity to present to
if we can bring the materials from the
Greens, Labour and National. And then I don't know if Simon has any thoughts. I think getting a cross-party group on rail can be difficult, just because I've found it very difficult to engage MPs from other parties, like in a cross-party group.
Then perhaps it's on the Golden Triangle, and perhaps Kerry's point about making sure that it talks about things like environment as well and other things. It's about how we get these, because we've got port strategies, we need to talk about freight strategies, etc. Julianne, I think you have to go. Thank you so much for your time. I hope your baby gets better soon. Simon, can I jump in? I'll let you.
Yeah, thanks. And look, I think, look, Julianne's done a few more terms in Parliament than me. I'm a first term MP, just still transitioning from civil engineer and delivering PowerPoints to people. And so, look, I think the concept of a select committee inquiry or potentially simply seeking a briefing allows the select committee, which is a cross-party group representing all parties in Parliament, allows us to call evidence from not just organisations, but also individuals, a range of stakeholders. We can advertise a call for submissions. We can then ask, say, officials in the Ministry of Transport to prepare a report on the information. Then we can report that back to Parliament. And that's what that was what the committee undertook for inquiry into congestion charging in Auckland as a means of managing traffic demand and making the most of the asset that we've got. I think there's a very clear directive from the government's, from the Independent Infrastructure Commission, that New Zealand is entering into a phase now where we're building stuff that we can't afford. There's no revenue stream associated with. It's going to be very difficult. So look, the congestion charging one was a good example where it actually meant we could collect a whole lot of information, and now that is going to be used to develop official policy around implementing congestion charging for starting with a major city. It's probably the best vehicle.
Simon, can I just add there, sorry, before you talk, Katrina. So I actually think one of the benefits we had along the way with Te Huia was opposition from David, who's left now, David Bennett. I talked to David Seymour. Actually, you don't have to have everybody saying this is the best idea ever to get robust conversation. And I think it's really important that the parties that are, or the people that are less than enthusiastic are part of the conversation. But the other part of that, Simon C, that you haven't yet seen is the proposal or a lot of, is a proposal around that community ownership, which elevates, takes what you're saying to a yes and rather than no but. So I would welcome the opportunity to keep that conversation going with ACT, and to a lesser degree, I mean, I know David's leaving now, but he was Transport when we did Te Huia and wasn't in favour of it at the time. So I think it's actually really important that dialogue continues, and it's not just us going, yay, trains, because it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. And look, Katrina, I'll just wrap up. Look, I mean, I think you're right about the yes and. For too long, we've seen infrastructure transport in New Zealand as an either or. Either you're going to get to drive your car to work, or we're going to take away all the parking and you'll be forced onto a bike in the rain. And so those kind of binary choices are not helpful. I think the concept of community ownership, I mean, I come from a background of being involved in public-private partnerships where private capital, the year before COVID struck, there was $300 billion of private capital sloshing around the world that was invested in infrastructure, and infrastructure for social benefit, right? To connect communities, to build hospitals, schools, prisons, whatever we need. Just the taxpayers of the world can't afford all the stuff that we want. And so look, if there's a case, so if there's a case, a business case, you say, well, look, here's a 50 or 60-year concession, here's a corridor, you can do whatever you want with it.
I think that's the feasibility.
Where we would support it.
I think that's the feasibility, and Simon, I think let's explore the cooperative model. Let's explore what that looks like, because we can design it the way that we want to design it. The interesting thing from a cooperative model, from my perspective, is the amount that you can save in public consultation. If you are investing in infrastructure, if government does decide it wants to invest in passenger rail, and let's be honest, regardless of what happens in terms of the intercity passenger rail discussion, we are investing a significant amount of money in freight, and that line will have to be upgraded for freight because it's already at capacity. So if we are going to invest that volume of money into that line, then why wouldn't we future-proof it for passenger rail? Because it would be stupid not to, and it would be a poor use of taxpayers' money not to invest in.
Well, Katrina, I admire your approach. That's what business case and cost benefit analysis options assessment is for. Again, absolutely think it's important that we look at how we make New Zealand better. And I've had the benefit of buying a Eurail pass and tooling all around Europe on trains and local trains in Eastern Europe, and I absolutely loved it. But I tell you, the Spanish ones weren't that flash. They had a different strange gauge, and it was like being in the back of a stock truck. So I don't recommend whatever they did in Spain.
Sorry, we're losing Jackie. Thank you so much for your time, Jackie. And we're slowly whittling down to our core team here.
Katrina, I'm going to have to go. I've just had the call, and I've got to go and speak on a bill shortly too. So thank you for inviting me.
Really appreciate your time. I know that you joined later, Simon, so this call is recorded. I will share a link with you so that you can see it from the beginning and hear what everybody else said as well.
Thank you. And while I haven't met Patrick before, if Patrick wants to send me a g'day, I'd be more than happy to talk about some of the transport initiatives that Patrick's working on and get some advice from him. I've got a few questions for him.
Yeah, and Simon, Michael here too, just quickly,
Hi,
I'm
Michael.
across all the issues you've discussed around the Auckland Program business case and all the extra investments that are needed to make the CRL realise its benefits. But what I bring also is I'm connected to the fast rail business case between Auckland and Hamilton. So the whole program across New Zealand Rail Passenger and how it all fits together has to be looked at as a program rather than project by project.
Absolutely agree.
And so well across that, and having been involved in some of the biggest business cases in the world for rail investment in the Middle East, well aware of all the financial and economic arguments that come to play and how you build that as part of an overall program. So happy to have that conversation and time with you as well.
By all means, reach out, send me a good day on the email, and we can set up a time for a coffee and chat.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
That'll be great. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And Kerry, anything else to add? In terms
just a request that I also get the recording so that I can share it with Angie and the wider team. Thank you so much for this. It's very helpful.
Absolutely, no problem at all, Kerry. Thank you so much for your contribution, and I think that what your thoughts in terms of environment have been incredibly helpful as well. So I really appreciate that contribution.
Thank you. I've got to go now as well. Hope you all have a good night or day, as the case may be. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Yeah,
all right.
Thank you. Bye.